I first heard about the Mumbai attacks, the 26/11 attacks, pretty much like everyone else did on the news. And kind of like everyone else, I saw a burning building and a lot of distraught faces and that sort of thing. And it was really only until I sort of pretty much saw the Surviving Mumbai documentary that, a totally different side of these attacks opened up. And, obviously it's the personal stories. It's the stories of the guests and the staff who were, trying to do whatever they could to survive. But also of the gunmen, of the terrorists who were caught up in this whole mess. There's one moment in the Surviving Mumbai documentary which really got me. There was a Muslim guest who was caught up in the attacks, and she was lying amongst another group of hostages who'd been caught, and they were being systematically killed, one after the other. And this guest talked about how, right at the critical time when she was about to be executed, her and her husband started reciting an Islamic prayer. And it was a prayer that had been learnt for one of their parents' funerals. They were Turkish nationals, so they didn't speak Arabic. The gunmen also didn't speak Arabic in that, they were from Pakistan, so they spoke a different language. But when one of the terrorists, after executing a number of people, came across this guest who was reciting an Islamic prayer, he faltered and he didn't know what to do. And the gunman did something curious. He did shoot. He fired 2 shots, but he purposely fired above the heads of the guests who were reciting the prayer, and then dropped the gun and ran out of the room. And there was something about that story that I found, really compelling and really interesting, just insofar as what it said about the terrorists, but also the guests sort of caught up in it. And that was the first of many different stories that came out of these attacks, which for me made it more than just a survival story, although it is, very much a survival story. In a way it was a bit of a microcosm, of some of the main issues and problems that we're confronted with in the world today. There were other stories like, there was a couple who had a child, and they talked about the fact that if they were both killed, their child would be an orphan. And so this is, part of this inspiration, melted its way into the Armie Hammer character, David character, where this guy was faced with this impossible decision where every human inkling in his body, every sort of cell of his body he was saying was kind of, was geared towards trying to physically be there for his wife, to try and protect her and support her, and to get support from her as well. And then the rational side of his brain sort of said, well, hang on a minute, if a bomb goes off above us, our kid's an orphan. If we both get lined up, our kid's an orphan. So in this impossible circumstance, he was kind of forced to part ways with his wife, where, they had to make this unbearable pact that, whatever happens, we're going to rely on each other to live through it, but we're going to have to do it separately so that our kid has a mother or a father. And, these, confounding, dramatic questions that were some of the things that I, that initially sort of hooked me into the project. Through the contacts that were made by the makers of Surviving Mumbai, we were able to get very quick access to, a lot of the people who lived through it. There was a level of trust that had already been built with the survivors and this production company, because they liked the way the doco had turned out and how they, I guess, came up in it. And so they were willing to sort of, go through other things again that might not have been covered in the interviews. In cases where we couldn't interview them in person, we're able to set up Skype meetings and all this sort of stuff. And so we spent the better part of about 6 months just listening, just going out and, trying to find the center of a really big story. The attack took place over 12 sites across Mumbai, but the key focus is arguably the Taj Hotel, which is one of India's and one of the world's most iconic and venerated hotels that, all manner of royalty and, business leaders and politicians and superstars and John Lennon and you name it, they've all been there. Taj really did become a focal point. It was where there was this protracted siege for a long time. And you can imagine in a hotel of that size, which has hundreds of guests and many more hundreds of staff all caught up in there, you've got 200 movies right there. You've got 200 different stories to explore. And at the start, our guiding light was to just kind of open our ears and listen to what the people were saying and to what they felt, with to try and have as few preconceived ideas as to what the movie could be, but to more just try and pretty much just see what would it feel like to live through an experience like this. What would it be like to get through the other side of an experience like this? How did it feel to be in there, like as a visceral experience? If I've got my sister on the phone, or my father or mother on the phone asking how I am. I've got my friends on the other side of the room who are cramped down underneath a table as the chandeliers are swinging and bullets are coming through the window. How would it feel then? How would it feel for the next 4 hours where literally nothing happens and it's just absolute silence and you don't know what's going to happen next? Which many guests actually said were the most terrifying moments, when nothing was happening. In a weird way, when a danger was imminent, survival mode kicks in and there's a sort of heightened awareness, as I'm told, and that was one thing. But the more unbearable moments, for some of the guests at least, were not knowing what was going to happen next. Dev was, I think, the first real actor that we had brought on board. One thing Dev wanted to explore a little bit more was what his family life was like. In the film, he plays a young waiter who's got a pregnant wife and also a young toddler. And he wanted to get into a bit more detail about both how he felt about his family, what his family life was like. He came from a very poor part of Mumbai, from one of the really rough kind of areas, but every day he'd turn up, as many staff members at the Taj do, and work in one of the most illustrious, beautiful, majestic kind of environments that you could imagine. But he comes from a place, with barely running water and all this sort of stuff, and the dichotomy between those two worlds and how he deals with it. Dev also has been to India many times on previous films. He also spent a fair bit of time at the Taj and at other attack sites, and he was sort of, he was really interested, also in exploring the fact that even though a lot of these staff members of the Taj, do come from these underprivileged kind of backgrounds, and Taj make a point to try and hire people from that world, to try and give them a leg up. A lot of the staff members who we interviewed would talk about how they saw the Taj, as a second home or as a second family, and that was an aspect that Dev wanted to explore a fair bit. With Army, it's really amazing to see his range, where you couldn't get a more different character than who he plays in Call Me By Your Name, than who he plays in Free Fire, or who he plays in Social Network, or who he's played in our film, David. And as a guy who kind of on the surface looks like the all-American guy, he's tall and blonde and sort of is built and all that sort of stuff. On the surface, he's that guy, but he was able to bring a real sort of delicacy and vulnerability to his part. He goes through the most harrowing thing, any person ever could, which you'll see in the film, in regards to what happens to him and his wife and other things. And he just, he really nailed it. Like, he wasn't afraid to to expose himself and, to work in some pretty grueling, gritty conditions here in India and elsewhere. And again, was a real supporter and a good friend. So Nazanin Boniadi plays Armie Hammer's wife in the film. She plays kind of like a wealthy Persian heiress, and when Nazanin came up on the radar, and I didn't really know of who she was before that, and so I googled her, and some clips from different films came up, but there was one thing that came up which I sort of found interesting, so I clicked on it, and it was a speech that she gave for Amnesty International, and there was some other speeches that she was giving in Persian and others in English, And there was just something about the way that she carried herself, not when she was acting, but just, in real life. And I thought, man, she'd be great for this role. And without even seeing, to be honest, much of her acting work, I just had this feeling that she'd be great, and we cast her and she wanted to do it. And there's a scene in the film where, as I wrote it, I could never have dreamt that the actors could bring the kind of power and gravitas to the film that it has ended up having. And it's really a testament to her and the gunman who's playing opposite her in that particular scene where your heart sort of falls on the floor. There's another actor that we have, Jason Isaacs, who plays a character called Vasily in the film. He's a sort of a Russian business magnate with a kind of seedy past, who doesn't really start off the film as, it's not really a wholesome character. You'll see when you see the film what kind of guy he is. And Jason brought such a humanity to the role. The role could have been a pretty stereotypical Russian goonbar type role, as it was first written. And again, I was very open to working with Jason, who'd spent a lot of time with Russians. He's actually got Russian-Jewish ancestry, in crafting his character and all that sort of stuff. And then we have Tudor Cobham-Harvey, who is obviously an Adelaide-based actress. Actually, she's not Adelaide-based actress anymore. She's from Adelaide. I had first seen her in 52 Tuesdays, a film made here in Adelaide, and like probably everyone else, was just blown away, both by her as an actor, but also just as a person. There's something about it that you just want to sort of see more and find out, what's that ticking behind those eyes. And she's super smart and just couldn't have wished for a better actor for that role. So Mumbai is one of the biggest cities in the world. It's a city of 20 plus million people, and it is just constant go, go, go. You literally can't sort of look in any direction on any street anywhere in Mumbai where there's not like 1,000 things going on at once. And then you go into the Taj, and it's kind of like the second that you walk through those doors, the air conditioning kicks in where it's really humid outside. There's very soothing, beautiful music playing. Just the way the staff and everyone walks, it's just, it's eerily calming, especially after coming out of the chaos that is just general life in Mumbai. And then the further you get around the hotel and walk around and just look at it, you think, wow, how many people had to come together to build this and to design this, and it really is an awe-inspiring place. I hope more than anything else, very simply, that the film does justice to the plight of the guests and the staff that were caught up in that hotel, but that it also helps people understand some of the just immediate human motivations of the terrorists who were doing it, meaning the guys that were on the ground, because there's some level of differentiation between them and their handlers who selected them out of a pool of many candidates from the rural backwaters of Pakistan. And the idea that if it wasn't that 10, it would be another 10, and if it wasn't that other 10, it would be another 10. There's a kind of an endless supply that they can draw from there, who they're able to radicalize, and who they're able, when I say they, this is the group that was behind this particular bombing attacks, but the same thinking is still true for many other similar types of groups. And our film doesn't delve at all into the geopolitics of the situation. It really doesn't. And it was a conscious choice not to, because it's very much a story that's told in real time from the perspective of the people who are living through the experience, meaning guests and staff who didn't know a lot of this stuff. So what we learn of the terrorists in the film is largely through observations that guests and staff make, basically either when they're hiding and they're looking at them, without the terrorists knowing, or it comes from once they've been caught and they're in amongst it. If the film does anything, I hope it's for audiences, on the one hand, to be grateful, that for the most part we won't live through, or hopefully won't live through, these sorts of things, but also that we need to understand why these events happen in order to sort of combat them, and not just at a level of putting metal detectors behind doors, in front of gates of hotels and stuff, but looking at the systemic reasons of why these events occur and how they're able to radicalize these people.